Started. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Dr. Tushar Mehta. I'm a physician also. I practice family medicine and emergency medicine, mostly emergency medicine nowadays. And just like Dr. Bukhari was saying, I also see a lot of people who basically suffer from the diseases that you get from, bad eating habits, which a lot of which includes animal products, as well as some, of the wrong plant products. And, Rizwan did a very good job of explaining to us, what's good to eat and what's not. So I'm going to talk about planetary health, just as it was a good segue that Rizwan made. Okay, so this presentation is called "The Earth's on Fire: Animal Agriculture and the Global Environmental Impact." Please take a screenshot or remember this title, because I'm going to go fast through the slides, but we have this presentation online as well. I made a recording of it last year at the UK Veg Fest. And I think that it's a really good recording as well. And the video, audio, my speech, everything came out really well. So I hope you can share that with other people. And attached to that is also the reference list of all the articles I use to reference what I'm saying, that provides evidence for the science behind what I'm saying. Because I want people to always look at the science and not just trust, whatever speaker, whatever they're saying, because there'll be somebody out there saying the opposite thing of what I'm saying. And we want to make sure that whoever is speaking, whether it's me or somebody else, that people are fact checking and that we make the studies and facts available to people. All right. So, oops, there we go. The Earth is on Fire, and that's how you can find it. If you look at this shot here, that is how you can find the presentation online. Just Google "The Earth is on Fire: Animal Agriculture and the Global Environmental Impact." What I'm hoping is not just that you'll absorb what I'm saying here, but you'll also be able to find the resources you need to then share this information and also continue learning yourself.
Tushar, you're not sharing yet. We don't see your we're not seeing your presentation.
You're not seeing my presentation. Why not? I thought it was sharing the screen. Let me do that again. It said host disable attendee screen share.
Oh, hold on a second. Sorry. Let me make you a co-host.
Oh, okay. Now I'll share the screen. And there we go. Is it working now?
Yep.
Now you can see it. Okay, perfect. Great. Okay, great, guys. Okay, so, oops. Okay, that's me right there. I also do a bit of international health. I work in Haiti and India, and I'm very interested in the evidence behind plant-based diet, environment, and also regarding health. Okay, all right. So there's our beautiful Earth, but these are the things that we are seeing in the news right now. They're seeing fires all over the place due to climate change, but also due to people burning down forest in order to produce meat, essentially, whether they want to burn down the forest and create a pasture so they can graze animals, or burn down the forest and grow soybeans and those things to feed animals on which then to eat. Okay, and we see this kind of thing everywhere, including some things that are plant-based products like palm oil, and including things that are caused by climate change as a consequence of all the things that we're seeing, right? We have these fires in California right now. And to understand the science, we also have to have an understanding of numbers and the meaning of numbers, and to understand them in sort of a global context. So we're going to start with people, and there are many, many beautiful people around the world. This is a hospital where I worked in India. You can see all the traditional beautiful costumes, and this is some of my friends that I've worked with in Haiti. Sam, who's on the very right bottom of the screen, I work closely with him, and this is in a village where we were working with some of the people there. Amazing, amazing people. So, and I worked with Sea Shepherd too, and some of the things I learned is that the Earth is actually big. When you think of the Earth, it's huge, but on the other hand, for our entire population, it's actually very small. So the first thing I do is I like to talk about world population, right? So if we have 1% growth of a population, it doesn't sound like a lot, but if you have 7 billion people, it means you're adding 1 billion people to the planet every 10 to 12 years. Okay, that's how fast our population is currently growing. And we're going to get to 10 billion people by 2050. And by the end of the century, it's going to be somewhere between 12 and 15 billion. We don't know for sure. Some people say that, oh, it's going to be exactly X amount. But actually, I think that that's not accurate, that they can predict it to such an extent. There are quite a few variables that will predict whether it's going to be larger or smaller than those fixed amounts that many people like to give us. I think that's a fallacy, okay? And you can see how fast the world's population is growing there on the bottom right. We have this exponential growth that's been happening now. Now, within this population, we have 800 million people living on less than $1.90 a day. 113 million people who suffer food shortages, 74 million people affected by conflict, 40 million modern slaves. There's a big slave population in the world, different kinds of modern slavery, and 80 million people that are forcibly displaced. Now, these are 2019 figures. Since COVID, there's an additional, 100 million people or more that are actually fitting into this category of extreme poverty, because bad things happen. Right now, it'll be COVID. A few years later, it'll be something else, maybe not an infection, but some other things. And these things are going to happen more frequently now with the environmental problems that we have. And this number of people in the extreme poor are going to increase, okay? There are 4.2 billion people in moderate poverty. They make less than $7.5 per day in their family per person per day. That's still pretty poor. At the same time, there's a growing number of billionaires and millionaires and a growing number of rich class as well. And there's a growing divide. There's this growing inequity, all right? And there are numbers showing that our global hunger is severe. And to get a healthy diet, it costs about almost $4 a day per person to eat a really healthy diet where you get not only your calorie needs, but also some protein, some fruits, some vegetables, and micronutrients and some variety that gives you a good diet, okay? And due to COVID, there it is, there's like 80 to 130 million people extra that are now food insecure, like in the extreme poverty, hunger kind of stage. That's more than 10% of the people on Earth, okay, in total. And so we have to look at, so what does all this have to do with plant versus animal-based foods? Now, in 2006, there was this, document, Livestock's Long Shadow, that really cracked open this whole idea that animal-based foods have a major impact on the environment. Now, Cowspiracy came out, and Dr. Rao knows very much about Cowspiracy. That really broke this issue wide open to the public and made a lot of people broadly aware. And then since that time, it's been more of an openly acknowledged topic, but there's still lots of controversy because of those people who just are sort of giving, kind of manipulating information into trying to create doubt, really, and like that. Now, 10,000 years ago, if you looked at wild animals, it was mostly wild animals that roamed the earth in terms of vertebrates, let's say, on land, okay? And humans were only one of thousands of land-based species, including birds and frogs and snakes and zebras and rhinos and elephants and everything. And we made up a minuscule part of that biomass. But today, humans make up about a third of the land animal vertebrate biomass, and livestock makes about 2/3. This number of wild animals being only 1% of the remaining biomass is because our numbers have become huge, and the wild animal biomass has declined so much due to the impact of humans. And it's getting worse. Now, the number may be a little bit bigger than 1%. There's other studies showing it could be up to 4%, but still you can see it's on a very small overall number. Or a different color? And there's somebody else's microphone that's maybe on there. So just to give you an idea of perspective, chicken and birds that people consume, poultry, what so-called, outweigh all wild birds by 3 times combined. And that's like 15 to 20,000 wild species of bird are outweighed. So we got to appreciate the scale of our animal agriculture, how massive it is and how much resources that must take up. And these are numbers from the WWF, and there's actually been some revised numbers coming out. But the wild animal population over the past 50 years or so has declined by about 60%, and the human population has almost doubled, okay? We should be shocked by these numbers People don't realize this because in our own lives, just sitting in our bubble at home, in our regular life, we don't notice anything wrong, right? Because we're just in our little bubble. But outside in the wide world, these things are really happening. We've changed 75% of the land-based environment on Earth. 2/3 of marine environment have been significantly altered. 3/4 of accessible freshwater systems are now devoted to crop or livestock use, and crop production has increased by 300% since 1970. The world's plant biomass has been cut in half. We've deforested half the world. And humans control 1/4 of net primary protection. That means 1/4 of everything that grows on the surface of the earth is controlled by humans. That means human agriculture. And agriculture occupies 40 to 50% of the non-frozen surface of the earth. Okay, so these are shocking numbers. So let's go back to animals. How do you feed animals? You feed animals, that big number of animals, by growing grains, soy, and oil seeds, and other crops, and some things called like silage. You grow them and you feed that to animals. Or you graze animals. That means you have ruminants. Ruminants can eat grass and convert, kind of sort of ferment and convert that grass in their gut into something that's digestible, that they can extract some carbohydrates and proteins from. And that means you're taking natural land and converting it to grazing land. When you have all these grasslands, there may be some lands that are naturally prairies, but that doesn't mean they're not altered by grazing. Grazing still alters that land even further. But much of the grazing land that people have think have been prairies forever were actually forests once upon a time. And humans changed them to grasslands over the centuries. And so we think that they're natural prairies, but actually still, they used to be forests. And as when they were forests, they hosted a different and greater biodiversity. And that when the forests were burnt or cut down, that CO2 has been put into the atmosphere. So converting that grazing land back into forests can reabsorb a lot of carbon. We'll talk about fish later, okay? Now, there's something called a feed conversion ratio. Now, this is something that we really have to understand. That an animal doesn't eat a kilogram of protein and then give you a kilogram of protein in the form of its flesh. It will convert that protein. It'll metabolize that protein, use part of it for energy, use part of it for certain enzymes that then get degraded, let's say in their GI tract. They'll do all kinds of things with that protein, but only part of that protein will then be incorporated into their flesh as something that somebody may later on consume, all right, or eat, okay? Now, at best, when it comes for chicken, at best, it can be 3 kilograms of protein consumed to 1 kilogram of protein that somebody can eat. Now, it's usually not always that good because even during COVID, you see all these animals getting sick and dying, and that affects their bottom line. It affects their efficiency. And even under normal circumstances, there's a certain percentage of chickens who die in the process of factory farming and whatnot. And that 3 kilograms comes from the most intensively factory farmed animal that has been given antibiotics and all kinds of stuff to reach that sort of efficiency, okay? And often places will have less efficiency. Okay, it could even be less than 6-to-1 ratio. And then you can see what we have there for other kinds of animals. And for milk and eggs. Milk and eggs are also extremely efficient relative to other animal foods, but compared to directly eating a plant food gives you 100% efficiency. The plant is grown, you get a certain amount of protein, you consume 100% of that protein. Okay, so plants are the most efficient, right, like that. Now, it gets a little bit more complex. There's also farmed fish, by the way, that don't, at maximum, they can be that as efficient as chicken at maximum. So don't let people fool you with farmed fish that making you think that they're really efficient. They're not, okay? And same with insects. Insects aren't magical. They also have a feed conversion ratio. In a test tube, an insect can be very, very efficient, but when you grow them en masse, they're no more efficient than chickens. And that's the key thing, okay? Don't let anybody quote you the efficiency you get from a test tube when you're growing like one little cricket. And when they're moving around as a mass, they're less efficient, okay? Now, so these are the, optimal feed conversion ratios that for chickens right there. And that means, 10 to 20 kilograms of dried soybeans or 30 to 60 kilograms of dried corn or grain becomes that that's the same amount of protein in that you're consuming. Okay. That's how much you would get if you just had the food there without feeding it to the animal. Okay. So now 10 calories. Now with calories, it's even less efficient. It gets 10 calories given to the chicken will make 1 calorie in return that may be edible. Okay. Okay, and these are also sort of non-organic. Okay, when you have organic foods, it's even less efficient, right? So inefficiency is basically a waste. Okay, and it's just as if you're taking all this plant food and wasting 2/3 or more of the protein and getting rid of it when you're converting it to animal food. So it's even a bigger waste than the food that's not eaten and thrown away. Okay. Now, how do we make these animals so efficient in the first place? Like when we have a human child as a baby, they don't grow so fast that, you can feed them this much and they'll convert that much protein every day into their own flesh. But all of these animals have been bred. And when we breed animals over generations, that is a form of genetic engineering. Chickens are not a natural animal. They've been bred from something called the red or wild jungle fowl, and they've been bred over centuries. And in 1957, we had chickens like this, and that chicken would take many, maybe many weeks to get to that size. Okay. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but you got a chicken like that after like many weeks. But after our advanced and sort of more disciplined breeding operations in 1978 and 2005, you get a chicken like this that will grow within 6 weeks to that size, and they can't even walk properly. Okay, they're grotesque, abnormal animals compared to their original. Now, of course, chickens are lovely. I don't mean they're grotesque in terms of their mean. They're lovely animals, and they're very interesting, and they have great personalities and all that stuff. But compared to what they were as a wild jungle fowl, they're kind of they're very unhealthy because of the breeding that we've done to them. Okay, but they grow so fast, so it's not anything akin to being natural. Okay, so now terrestrial livestock, 70 billion land animals are slaughtered per year. That's about 2,000 animals per second. Okay, mostly chickens. But then there's monogastrics, so that means with one stomach, chickens, pigs, and other birds. They eat grain, soy, and oil seeds. And then there's ruminants, so it's cattle, means goats, buffalo, sheep, okay, and cows. They create methane when they eat food. They may eat grains, oil seeds, silage, hay, so crops that we grow, but they may also graze. Either way, they create methane, but they create more methane when they are grazing. Okay. So now let's look back at some of our numbers. 75% of the Earth's land is altered by humans, but 40 to 50% is actually agriculture. That's what we do. But 40 to 40% of the Earth's total land is actually used for animal agriculture. Okay? So the biggest use of land by humans is animal agriculture, and grazing is the biggest proportion of that. 10 to 15% of the Earth's land is for growing crops that are not animal feed, but that includes things like cotton and other stuff that we don't eat. So it's only 5 to 10% of the Earth's land grows crops for direct human consumption, maybe around 7% realistically. And that, and considering how much land animal agriculture takes, it still only provides 35 to 40% of all the protein that is consumed by humans. So think about that. You use all this land, but you're still only providing this much of the total protein that humans eat. Plant foods occupy only roughly 7% of the Earth's surface and provide 60 to 65% of the total protein that humans consume. Grazing, which may constitute about 20% of the Earth's sort of habitable land, only produces 1 to 2% of the world's protein. It's radically inefficient. And despite being radically inefficient, you will see people right now talking about regenerative agriculture and rotational grazing and carbon negative beef and all that stuff. There's a big movement sort of pushing for this, but these guys are all basing their information on really nothing. They're just sort of making it up, telling really nice stories, but have no good data behind it whatsoever. Okay, they have some data that they kind of manipulate, but I want you guys to all look out for this narrative that's pretty much fake. Okay, it's just like when, you know, during, I think, an election, in the U.S., I don't know, last election or the election before, there was all these advertisements for clean coal and ethical oil and all that kind of stuff. They're just making these things up. Okay, and animal food only provides 18% of the world's calories, despite occupying so much of the Earth's surface. Okay. Now, these numbers vary slightly depending on the source. That's why I gave you some of these little ranges there. Okay. That's why it's from this to this, because there's different sources, but you can see they're all within the same ballpark. This is a UN document. You can see the orange bar circled in the middle, and that's like that's a bar about land use, and it's showing you that animal agriculture is the biggest use of land by humans for out of anything that we do. Okay. And the Amazon rainforest destruction, which has happened at a rampant rate over the past couple of years, including this year, the main problem is growing plants to then feed animals, to then feed humans. China is the biggest consumer, but a lot of their products go to places in Europe and other places too. So the fundamental issue is you have less efficiency. Animal agriculture is less efficient. There's a feed conversion ratio. You have to feed more calories and more protein and get only a smaller amount back. And therefore it takes more total land, more total water. And then you're going to put, you know, pesticides and antibiotics and fertilizers on that land, including when they're grazing these animals on these grasslands. These animals are consuming this grass. People put fertilizer on those grasslands as well. Okay. And because it's the biggest use of land, it's also the biggest cause of ecosystem disruption and destruction. Okay, you're taking down the rainforest. You're drying up, you're draining the wetlands to create pasture or farm, you know, grow crops to feed animals. You're losing your natural grasslands because when animals graze on them, they change the grasslands from what is natural. Despite what these people who are pro-grazing are talking about, it's not like that. They actually disrupt the environment quite extensively when they graze animals on what is otherwise natural grassland. So you get biodiversity loss. And it's far greater, like plant-based foods, eating plant-based foods is going to have an impact too. When you're feeding, you know, 8 billion people that we almost have, you're going to have an impact, but there's a far, far greater impact on animal-based foods. There's also, we, you know, deforest so we can get all these products that we sell at IKEA and forestry wood and paper and everything that we use, which is crazy how much we use and how much things we use, and we use it for a little while, throw it away, buy new stuff. And that's also a cause of deforestation, but not nearly as much as animal agriculture. What often also happens is that people make roads into the forest to do some deforestation, and then animal agriculture takes over next and just completely deforests everything. Okay, so grazing versus factory farming. Factory farming is actually much more efficient than grazing. You use less total land and everything like that. But you get more antibiotic usage, animal welfare issues, and various environmental issues. I'm not saying animal factory farming is good. I'm saying that it's more efficient than grazing. And grazing uses the most land, has the greatest biodiversity impact, and greatest methane release as well, okay, on a per kilogram basis of, let's say, beef or other animal product. Now, soil erosion is also a big problem. When we grow plant-based foods, we also cause erosion. When we have plow-based agriculture, you cause erosion. But 50% of the crops that we grow are actually to feed animals, which are then fed back to humans. So half of the crop farming we do is actually for animal agriculture. But you're getting less food back from that animal agriculture, right? So it's less efficient. And so grazing, however, also causes extensive erosion. These cattle and sheep and goats and buffalo, they eat grass in many cases very, very low. And they eat every shrub and little trees that start growing. They'll eat those too when they're just shoots. And you'll get rampant erosion in places where animals graze. You get the soil going into rivers, you get replacement of grasses by different species of grass, all kinds of things. And the worst form of soil erosion is desertification, which is there's multiple causes for it, in terms of the human impact on land, but grazing is one of the biggest parts of it, one of the biggest contributors to this. Okay, so that's soil. Okay, so plant-based foods uses less land, ultimately uses less soil. We could do plant-based agriculture even better to cause less erosion, but still overall right now, animal agriculture is a much bigger cause. And okay, so you get all this impact on natural vegetation, biodiversity, erosion. You also get animal waste, which is the feces that contaminate water. And that's the whole another consequence of it. And you get the climate change gases. Now, don't be fooled by industry misinformation. There's this devastatingly bad TED Talk by this guy named Alan Savory. And, it's completely making this stuff up that, you graze cows on the land, it improves the land, they sort of fertilize the land with their poop. But that's not true, because the only nitrogen and phosphorus in their poop is that which they have eaten already. So they're not bringing anything new to the land. They're just eating stuff and then pooping it back. Okay, it's not creating anything new on that land, as compared to, for example, growing pulses, which brings brand new nitrogen from the air into the land. Okay, and so these people, and there's a whole bunch of there's this book and movie and website called Kiss the Ground, and there's even vegans involved in that movement that believe that you have to have cattle that will store carbon into the soil, and it's all bogus. Okay, these are all kind of made up things. They're kind of lies. So we'll talk more about that now. And then there's a book called Sacred Cow, and all kinds of people talking about this, and it's causing confusion, just like the people who cause confusion about climate change and their climate change deniers and all that stuff. And again, the clean coal and just like the smoking industry telling you that smoking was okay way back in the day. It's the same kind of thing going on here. Water use, because animals consume more plants, then on a per protein unit and per calorie unit, you're going to use more water. Okay. And 70% of the world's water is used for agriculture, 50% for crops, but half those crops are for animals, right? And note that 70 to 80% of all soy is fed to animals, and only 6% is probably for direct human consumption, okay? And much of that is just soybean oil fed to people. So humans consume very, very little soy out of the total amount of soy. There's a lot of soy that's also used for industrial purposes. So if anybody tells you that soy is inefficient, it's only inefficient because it's fed to animals. When humans eat it, it's very efficient, okay? All right. Okay, and there's a water crisis in the world, and when animals are consuming more water, then it's a problem. Note that we have such a problem with water insecurity in the world population. Major rivers do not even reach the ocean because we're draining them for irrigation, and fresh waters are being devastated of their animal populations and biomass. And so there's a lot of problems here with saving our rivers and lakes and everything like that. Being vegan helps, but there's other issues too, including population and other things that we do that overuse and misuse water. Animal agriculture, the poop that and feces of animals and the fertilizer used on land that we graze animals and the land that we use for growing crops for animals runs into water. This also includes fertilizer used for plant-based foods. Okay, so we still have to be conscious about this as vegans. A lot of this runs into rivers, and the fecal matter, the poop, runs into rivers and lakes. Then you get this hypergrowth of algae in plants, uses up oxygen and kills native wildlife because they've used up all the oxygen, and caused many other toxic effects in the water ecosystem, including various bacteria and parasites, okay, and soil that goes into the water. And we're killing off so many lakes and rivers and the life in those lakes and rivers. When those lakes and rivers reach the ocean, they create ocean dead zones because of the high nitrogen, phosphorus, bacteria, and everything else that's in that water, especially due to animal agriculture, okay? But remember that even plant-based agriculture could be done better, okay? I don't want to give a completely one-sided view there, okay? So now climate change, okay? climate change, like people always talk about climate. Whenever you hear about the environment, it's always about climate. But remember, climate is only one of many big problems. As I mentioned, land use change, water use, biodiversity loss, soil erosion. Those are all problems that are equally big as climate. And they are some of the causes of climate change. So it's worth even talking about them before climate change. Now, climate change being one of the big problems, let's talk about that. In 2006, the UN said that 18% of global warming gases were caused by animal agriculture, and that this exceeded the worldwide emissions from the tailpipe, not the construction of vehicles, but the exhaust from all vehicles combined. That's all trains, planes, automobiles, cars, boats, everything combined. And there was some political pressure, and the UN downgraded this to 14.5 because there are things that people include and don't include in those calculations. And depending on what you're including and excluding, you're going to get different numbers. Dr. Rao created just recently published a paper that puts the number even higher than 51%. But there's a World Watch magazine that published a paper saying that this is maybe up to at least 51% of global greenhouse gas emissions are caused by animal agriculture. So there's all these different numbers out there. The truth is probably not the lowest maybe, or the highest number. I think it's controversial, but you have to see what you're including and excluding and look very careful at that. And it has to be transparent and understandable. But when we look at the different sources of emissions from different animals, we see that beef, extensive means beef from grazing, is caused the highest amount of emissions. And then, beef intensive, when you're factory farming, there's the least amount of beef emissions, but then there's all the other animals down here, other animal products. But when you go into plant products, it's minuscule even compared to these animal products. And we want to get as low as we can, right? So a lot of people are telling us, okay, just switch to like poultry and eggs and these monogastric animals, but we can still do better than that by eating plants. And remember, the impact of animal agriculture is not just greenhouse gases. Eating poultry, eggs, dairy, pork may cause less emissions than beef, but there are still other big environmental problems associated because of the amount of feed you have to give them and the poor protein conversion ratio. On that same land, if you grew food for direct human consumption, we would be far more efficient and use a lot less land, okay? So the climate change gas that we get CO2 from burning down the forests and draining the wetlands and clearing the wetlands. All the biomass decomposes or is burnt and releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That carbon was stored by those biological systems before they were burned or cleared. Methane, which is much more potent than CO2, but occurs in a smaller quantity, occurs from all the animal poop. It's decomposing, and then you get methane. You deforest, you cause deforestation. You have all this biomass that's lying around that decomposes, that releases methane. And you also get the ruminant, the animal, goats, sheep, buffaloes, cows that eat food and then they burp out methane as part of the rumination process. Nitrous oxide also occurs due to animal waste decomposition and decomposing biomass from forest and wetland clearance. And that's another climate change gas that occurs, again, more from animal agriculture because that is what is causing the deforestation. Now let's talk about fish, all right? So it's the beautiful blue part of our planet. And if we look at UN FAO statistics, it's about in 1950, we took 20 million tons of fish from the oceans, okay? In 2016, it's 140 million tons from the ocean and 60 million tons from aquaculture. Aquaculture is partly fed the wild fish that we are catching from the ocean, that ground up and then fed to the farmed fish, and partly from land-based foods that are fed to these animals as well. So plant foods being fed to fish, a combination. But there's also, again, a feed conversion ratio. If you just directly eat those plant foods rather than feeding them to the fish, you'd have more protein available for direct human consumption. Now, there's a lot of fish that are also taken from the ocean, illegal, unregulated, undocumented, estimated in 2003 to be 11 to 26 million tons. Who knows how much it is now? It could be double, triple, or quadruple even that, because there's a big sort of mafia kind of competition that's going in the ocean with all kinds of unregulated fishing by all kinds of very aggressive countries. You hear about China all the time, but it's more than just China that's aggressively fishing the oceans in an undocumented way. Okay, but there's 0.79 to 2.3 trillion tons of fish that are taken from the ocean. Trillion fish that are taken from the ocean, trillion individual fishes that are taken from the ocean. That's between 2007 and 2016. That means 25,000 to 70,000 fish per second are removed from the ocean. And those numbers are radical. Okay, we just have to think about how many fish, how powerful fishing is. And people always talk about fish. Oh, I eat fish, it's more eco-friendly. It causes less climate change and that stuff. Maybe it causes less greenhouse gas emissions, but not as few emissions as plant-based protein sources. But the impact on the ocean, forget about climate, the impact on the ocean is just devastating. Okay, don't look at the climate change impact of fish, look at the ocean impact of fish. And looking at that, we see that 33% of the fish populations of the oceans are like completely harvested at unsustainable levels, 60% maximally fished. There's only like 5 to 7% that fish in some kind of a sustainable sort of replacement kind of way. And it's getting worse and not better. Farmed fish is not eco-friendly. That's complete bogus. And when they have these eco certifications about fish, remember that these are just created by the fishing industry and serve mainly as marketing tools, but there's no science behind that. Okay, those are just meant to sort of give you a nice story and they kind of fool you. It's not really true that these eco certifications represent anything that's actually ecological. And fish sentience, fish are the most, people think of fish as objects, but, they actually have good studies on fish cognition, memory, social interactions, pain experiences, emotions, etc. And that by, the United Nations estimates that by 2050 or whatever, 2070 or by the end of the century, whatever it might be, in the coming decades, 90%, greater than 90% of the fish in the oceans will be gone, extinct. And, sharks and whales are already decimated. Whales being less than 1% of their original populations in the oceans. We've just killed them all. The biggest cause of killing whales is fishing nets nowadays. We're not hunting fish as much, although there are still some people doing that, but fishing nets are still the biggest cause of death for whales. Shark finning, and the nets and everything that people use are killing everything in the oceans. There's no such thing as dolphin safe tuna. They just write that on the can. It's not true. Okay, we're killing everything in the ocean through our fishing nets that are catching all animals, and all the bycatch and everything like that. It's happening, as I mentioned. And then there's this military competition over the seas that's getting worse as people aggressively try to fish the oceans. Now, one thing here is all the abandoned, lost, discarded fishing gear. We'd hear about plastic in the oceans, and they try to tell you that we can abandon straws. But that's like a fake solution. They're just trying to create this fake solution to keep you occupied and make you think that we're doing something. Whereas the real problem is not the straw. Cigarette butts are much bigger weight. They're made out of certain type of plastic fibers, the cigarette butts, and they're the biggest thing that humans throw around that go everywhere in terms of a single-use object that's discarded. But same with all the cups, never mind the straws and all kinds of plastic. But 20% of ocean plastic is fishing gear. And 46% in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch of the ocean is fishing gear. And all these nets and everything that people discard and leave in the ocean when they've kind of not good quality after they've used them a few times, they throw them into the ocean because it's much cheaper than bringing them back on land. And these things cause ghost nets. They kill all kinds of animals in the ocean, and they're the deadliest of all plastics in the ocean. So I don't mean for you to read this small stuff that's there, but I'm just showing you that there's just big. There's very good reports now on biodiversity loss and in the oceans and on land, and animal agriculture is considered one of the major causes. But including just all the other things that people do, including our air travel, road travel, urban sprawl, all the materials and the energy that we use and everything like that. And hunting and extinction of wild animals. People try to tell you that hunting is natural or something like that. But note that between 50,000 and 3,000 years ago, what we call the Quaternary extinction period, and the sort of Paleocene and times, half of all large mammal animal populations were basically became extinct, and hunting and climate change were the causes. But hunting was a big part of this, and wherever humans appeared on Earth, they eliminated a lot of the wild, large mammals and animals that were there, and that a biomass of land animals is 6 times lower than pre-human times, and our livestock numbers have increased so much. Okay, and hunting, there's 362 large animal species. So I'm trying to move around this. Here we go. Maybe I'll do. There we go. There's 362 large animal species on Earth, that what we call megafauna, but 70% of them are in severe decline, and 59% of them are at risk of extinction. And hunting is one of the biggest causes of the extinctions of large animals. The zebras, giraffes, lions, tigers. Habitat loss is the concurrent big cause, but then people love to hunt big animals, and they reproduce slowly, and their numbers are small, and we're hunting them to extinction. Okay. And this United Nations report talking about species extinction rate accelerating in animal agriculture, and including hunting being a big part of the cause. Biodiversity loss and extinction, where there's 1 million out of 11 million species that are now threatened on the planet. It's the age of the Anthropocene extinction era. Not only are we causing species extinction, but extinction and degradation of entire ecosystems. And animal agriculture is the biggest cause because it uses the most land. But remember that overpopulation, other land use changes, and fragmentation, for example, all the roads we build everywhere fragment the continuous intact ecosystems, making it hard for animals to move around. They don't want to cross roads. They get killed crossing roads. The materials economy, which is all of our mining, our pollutants, climate change, urban design, etc. So other things are also big problems. Even if we're vegan, we do overconsume all kinds of materials and energy, and have big houses and cars, etc. And being vegan doesn't solve everything. All right. So food security. How do we feed the future world population? Remember that animal agriculture uses 30% of the non-frozen surface of the earth, maybe 30 to 40%, but only produces 35 to 40% of the world's protein. If we converted all that land to plant-based agriculture, and just only used a small part of it, really, we could feed an additional 4 billion people conservatively, if we just converted that to plant-based agriculture. That's a conservative estimate, because currently we're only using about 7% of the Earth's surface. So if you free up 30% of the Earth's surface, certainly another 7% could feed a lot of people. Okay. Now, this doesn't mean that food will get to the places that it's needed, because humans are not very good at sharing, but it just shows that we can at least grow that much. Okay. Now I have all the references, as I mentioned, if you look up this presentation online. So let me just check my time. I think that, we're getting the message here. We're going through, the major information here. And we're, another point is that meat diverts a lot of food, land, and water from the global poor to the global rich, because the global rich will take over land and water in places and use that to make meat for themselves, whereas the poor people, have less land than available to them to just grow like the beans and rice and lentils that they're going to eat and grains. There's a lot of land grabbing that's displacing indigenous people all over the world. For example, in the Amazon, they're taking land away from indigenous people to use for meat production that will be consumed in China or Europe or other places like that. Okay, and biofuels are a similar problem, though not as big a problem. They're still a problem too. And this is a big food justice issue, as we take away land of the earth and then use it for meat that is going to be eaten by rich people in the world and not available to poor people in the world. Okay, we can see these things happening in our own country, and a plant-based plant diet will also contribute to solving this problem, but we also still have to be looking at this issue from multiple sides to solve it. Going vegan isn't an automatic win, but it's a big part of the solution. Ecological factors that influence conflict and war. So when you have climate change, food insecurity, overpopulation, and land and water shortages, and then people are overusing land with animal agriculture, you're going to have people fighting over land and water. And places like the Middle East, Burundi, Congo, Somalia, Sudan, all these places, part of the reason why they're in conflict is over land and water shortages, exacerbated by the factors I just mentioned, and animal agriculture is a big contributor. Okay, so remember that there's still a lot of food waste. 30 to 40% of all food is wasted, and biofuels are also a waste of land. You're taking land away from crop production for humans and using it now for fuels for your car instead. Okay, and pulses and whole grains are the real solution. Okay, so when we talk about plant-based proteins, we should really focus on pulses and whole grains. Pulses meaning beans and lentils and those kind of things as the replacement for animal product. So love your pulses. Okay, 2016 International Year of the Pulses by United Nations. They have a lot of good publications about it, and 20% of dry weight of protein is soy. In pulses, sort of in beans and lentils, and soy is 30%, okay, with a fraction of the CO2 equivalents compared to other animals. 1/10 the carbon dioxide or CO2 greenhouse gas equivalents of versus to chicken. They also bring nitrogen. Pulses bring nitrogen into the soil, help rejuvenate the soil and make it better for other plants to grow. And the three sisters were grown by indigenous people. They grew beans, corn, and squash together. And the beans would fertilize the corn and the squash. Squash provided a stalk for the beans to grow on, and the squash covered the ground and it suppressed other weeds and helped water stay in the soil by providing shade on the ground. Beautiful combination. And this was indigenous sort of wisdom of not having monoculture, but growing things together that helped each other. And of course, that requires more individual attention rather than machines. So it can also create more jobs, I guess, too. Okay, oops, went the wrong way. And remember, whole grains have about 10% protein. Now, there's certain cultivars and breeds of these things that can also increase the protein in there. Canada's new food guide is more plant-based, but I should replace these slides with the Lancet. You can remember that the Lancet has a planetary food guide, which is very, very plant-based and shows how you can feed the most amount of people with an overall mostly plant-based diet. Okay, it's a very, very plant-shifted. The Lancet Planetary Food Guide, which I think is even better than the Canada Food Guide. But the Canada Food Guide was good progress. And the Eat Lancet Commission talks about how to feed 10 billion people by 2050 and minimize ecological damage in the process, and at the same time decrease cardiovascular disease and cancers. And that in their planetary diet recommendations, they talk about eating more plant-based foods, essentially. Okay, so as Riz was saying, eat these broad, eat the rainbow, pulses, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds as well. Be careful about consuming too much plant-based oils, okay? And here's a presentation by me. I give a great overview, I think, of plant-based diet and health kind of in one lecture, kind of like the way Dr. Riz did. And you can check that out. Just Google Tushar vegan red apple, and it'll bring you to the right YouTube presentation, okay? And it's a good tool to use just you want to know everything after you sort of 90% of things you need to know after one lecture, go check that out, all right? And be careful, some plant foods also have a high eco impact. So the processed foods that we don't need to eat, there's an eco impact and a health impact for no reason. Palm oil, ramen noodles, white bread, sugars, and all this other junk, donuts, whatever. We don't need to eat that stuff. Maybe once in a while, but not as a sort of regular kind of consumption thing. Also be careful of the packaged foods and all that, and be careful of food waste. Even as vegans, we should be careful of that. Look out for human rights impacts. There's a lot of human rights impacts of animal-based foods. I'm not going to go into all of them, but some things like chocolate, and we should only eat fair trade chocolate or slave-free chocolate. Look up the Food Empowerment Project. Bananas, organic bananas, are better for human rights because the non-organic bananas, people who live on those farms get sprayed with all kinds of chemicals while they're working and living on the banana plantations. It's all for other plant-based foods as well, and we want to watch out for that. But animal-based, there's lots of human rights issues and can be even worse. For those of us who are not vegan, we're always encouraging people, it's not being vegan or nothing, you go step by step and take some, and do what you can, right? Every step is a positive step for your health and for the planet, so let's all be friends about this and not get into like vegan or not vegan debates, but let's, every step we do leads to a next step as well, generally speaking, so it's always going to go in the right direction. That's what's important here. Let's also be careful about all the other things we consumed. I've already mentioned that. And let's sort of, keep learning at the same time, being humble about this and try to work together as a team on this big project, okay? And keep looking at all the different things that are going on, even in this conference, about social justice, sustainable development, environmental economics, and war, peace industry, you name it, okay? Being vegan is a cornerstone of all of these, of a better world, but we need to look at all these things together. I don't want to exclude that. Check out my lecture on pandemics. Animal agriculture is the biggest cause of future pandemics. It's going to be a big cause of future pandemics. We're always generating new viruses. COVID-19 is caused by a form of animal agriculture. Same with HIV. Same with H1N1, swine flu, and future pandemics are going to be coming through animal agriculture, because when we breed animals or collect together animals through the bushmeat trade, we are exposing ourselves, or we are generating and breeding viruses at the same time. Okay, so you can look up this animal agriculture and the origin of pandemics, like COVID-19 with Dr. Tushar Mehta. It's a good podcast that overviews the topic. Check out our website, Plant-Based Data, where we're going to have, we're collecting a lot of the references that you would like to see about plant-based diet and health. Okay, and keep being compassionate, as Dr. Riz said as well. And yeah, so I'm going to wrap up here. It's just saying that plant diet is fundamental to sustainability, and it's on par in importance with the fossil fuel and materials economy, okay? But that doesn't mean as a vegan that you can say I'm vegan, so therefore I can fly anywhere I want to. It doesn't quite work like that, okay? We still have to be careful, very careful and conservative about those things, okay? And look out for all the other causes of environmental destruction as well. Shout out to Greta, okay? And there we go, all right? So hopefully, let's see what time it is right now. I better take a look here. Wow. We're a little bit late. Okay.
Good job, Tushar.
How's everybody doing?
Great job, Tushar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Nice to see your faces. I got your faces up again.
Okay. Can you stop sharing? I can make.
Yeah. Okay. Let me do that. Okay. Should I stop video or just?
No. I'll do it.
Okay. You do that. Okay.
No, you don't have to stop video. You can stop share.
Okay, there we go. I'll start video, but find my share screen. It says share screen. How do I stop sharing?
No, you've already been stopped sharing. I did.
Oh, I've already been stopped sharing. It's okay. It's done. Great. Okay, good. Okay, anybody have any questions, or do you have to run right to the next presentation?
We have to run right to the next.
Yeah, you better do it.
She's been waiting. Okay, so I'm going to just turn this off.